We're joined by a lawyer, Dr. Gagai Forwarder, who is an All Progressive Congress chieftain and a poet. We're looking at the issue of the crisis, and perhaps we'll call it a war between Israel and Hamas, and of course what has that has cost the world in general, especially Nigerians, as well as some of the traveling by pilgrims to Israel and Jordan has been halted. But first, let me come to you. Good morning, Neil. It's good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, a lot of people said it was completely unprecedented, that a terrorist organization would have the capacity to organize and coordinate that kind of attack on land, on sea, on air, almost at the same time simultaneously. How do you look at what is happening in Israel and the conflict between them and Hamas? Did you see it coming?
I would say yes. Not in the precise details of how the latest crisis has unfolded, has happened, but that there will be another crisis, there will be endless crisis in Palestine. Anybody would know that. Anybody would know that. This will be going. It says it's an unending, recurring cycle. It's time the world came together the same way the world came together in 1948 through that UN Resolution 181 to partition Palestine in order that the Israelis will have a homeland of their own. It's time they also came together to resolve this issue. I actually object to calling Hamas a terrorist organization. We all know one man's terrorist is another's freedom fighter. We have had the likes of Nelson Mandela described as terrorists and the ANC as a terrorist organization. So this is nothing new. Okay. And we had the Mau Mau fighting for the liberation of Kenya as terrorists. Who is naming? Who is the terrorist in Palestine? Maybe when we go along in this program, we can talk about that. But I think it's no surprise. And if the world does not summon the courage, the heart to address the problem, the root cause of the problem in Palestine, which is a whole people driven off their land, driven into exile, confined to Bantustans. You know what you call Bantustans in South Africa? Small strips of land. They own the whole land. They occupy the whole land at any rate. Let's not go into all those arguments. At least they occupied the whole land pre-1948. That is a fact of history, that they were there. And in 1948, they were driven out by the Zionists. So until that crisis is redressed, addressed honestly, courageously, so that the two people who belong to the same father, they're all children of Abraham, and they're all children of God, so they can live peacefully together, we can expect that this will continue to happen.
All right, so maybe in the context of the kind of onslaught that was done by Hamas, perhaps, critics of maybe various, security experts would say the terminology terrorism would differ amongst, like you just explained, the quarters. Because, again, the advantage of surprise that Hamas was able to use to invade Israel, and the ability to prepare unknown to Israel, who has the Kashi of intelligence network, undid a lot of, surprising elements. Again, that the killings that have happened, babies were slaughtered, families were slaughtered, they were attacked in the middle of the night when they were sleeping. Some people say that is an element and a trait of terrorism or, radicalism. So I do not know if you agree with that contexture or maybe not.
Well, first of all, it is always, to me, any loss of life, any premature loss of life is something that is painful, sad, and tragic. Now, I don't want to minimize the fact that to the world and to me, it's horrific. Anybody be horrified by that. But then, this was what happened to them in 1948. Again, the trouble is that historical memory is short. What has happened now is happening in a period where internet is happening right before the eyes of everybody. It's being broadcast to the whole world. In 1948, there wasn't social media. In 1948, even cable television wasn't in existence. So what happened outside the glare of the rest of the world. And not many people know the history of how Israel came to be. There was no Israeli state in 1948 when the land was taken over. And nobody, I like to urge Nigerians not to be more Zionists than the Israelis themselves. I would like to urge them. I will urge them to every Nigerian to be informed, to read about the crisis, the conflict, this unending war. What is the root cause of it? I would like to even recommend a book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, written by a Jewish scholar, Ilan Pape. This is not by a Christian or by a non-Jewish scholar. A Jewish scholar, respected historian, Ilan Pape. The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. I would like to recommend that book. Then I would like to recommend a second one, My Promised Homeland, The Triumph and Tragedy of Israel, by the great-great-grandson of a founding Zionist, Theodor Herzl, a founding Zionist. We're not talking about, just anybody, but a founding Zionist who admits that his people wiped out the Palestinians, took over their lands, conscripted their land. And then when you banish them to tiny strips, one is called a bank, the West Bank, the other one Gaza. Gaza is an open prison. It's been described as the world's largest open prison. How can the people, what do you expect? They'll be driven to desperation. And it's acts of desperation that lead to what we're seeing now. But in 1948, it was also desperation that led Israelis, Jews from all over the world, fleeing persecution, who after the Nazi Holocaust, who say, we have to have a homeland of our own. It was desperation that drove them to commit the atrocities they committed, poisoning water wells, killing children, killing women, pregnant. They should just read the history. They should just read the history so that we'll be better inclined towards finding peace between these two brothers and sisters. Not to take pitch camp with Israel because it is a democracy. It is a this. It is a, but what kind of democracy banishes a people to open prisons in their own land and occupies their land, and we're calling it a democracy? Okay,
let me, because you said something quite critical. I mean, where did this all start from? How did we get here? The Hamas operation has been called the Al-Aqsa Storm. And they said that the assault was a response to what they described as Israeli attacks on women, the desecration of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and the ongoing siege, like you mentioned, in Gaza. But beyond that, I know that there have been, perhaps attempts by the United Nations, world bodies, etc., to look at some sort of semblance of peace. A modicum of stability between the two regions. But it seems as if there is no end in sight. When communications have failed, dialogue has failed, how does this affect the world in general?
Well, first of all, every time there's a crisis in the Middle East, which is principally the Israeli-Palestinian war, but of course there are other, crises in the Middle East, Syria, and so on, it affects world prices of oil. We know that because the Middle East is a major supplier of oil, and therefore energy to the world, to power the industries of the world, power our homes. So it definitely disrupts, international trade, and, nobody can doubt that. But beyond, even on a purely humanitarian level, it affects the world because the world cannot just sit back while a people who will be driven off their land and driven to exile are kept under occupation. Okay, there's the attempts to solve the problem led to the two-state solution. So the UN resolution was about two states. Let's have two states, one for the Jewish people and one for the Palestinians, the Arab Palestinians. So that's the solution. But even then, as bad as that solution was, because in partitioning Palestine, the more fertile, better parts of the land were on the side of the Jewish state. So you have the Negev Desert and the West Bank, and those are the areas for the Arabs. But even then, it was already tilted in favor of the Jews. Now, it is those pre-1967 borders that those who advocate a two-state solution urge Israel to return to. Israel has refused to return to the pre-1967 borders, which already is unfavorable to the Palestinians. But, well, some will say half a loaf. If that's what is better than none, if that's what will bring peace, yes. But they have refused. As we speak, they insist on continuing to build in the West Bank. So if you are still taking over the lands of the people as we speak, because this is one of the major conflicts, if you remember, between Israel and the government and the more progressive-minded governments of the United States. I'm using that term advisedly, the more progressive-minded, because in general, American foreign policy has been totally taken over by the Jewish lobby, so that it is unresponsive to the demands of the Palestinians. It's almost as if the Palestinians don't have a right to exist in this world. And I keep asking the question, are they not human beings? Are they not children of God and even of the same Father? So if we want peace, it's going to be, for a start, Israel returning to the pre-1967 borders before, and then committing to the return of the exiles, because these are the sticky points. Those who were driven, about nearly 1 million, the figures usually between 700,000 and 1 million Palestinians who were driven into exile, driven from their homes. In the dead of night, in the morning, women, children, again, people can go into history. The books are there and read about this. So when they say now, oh, they came, they killed children, they killed women, but that was the same thing that happened to them in 1948. All
right, we'll take a quick break. When we'll come back, I mean, the UN Secretary Chair in Brazil has announced it will call an emergency meeting of the body to look at issues of the insecurity and the escalating violence between Israel and Hamas. And when we'll come back, you know, Doc, I'll be looking at the political perhaps the explanation and the divided support of different, like you said, progressive countries for either Hamas or Israel. Come back to the conversation. I spoke to you about the support lines and how this shows political coloration based on economic ties. So America has come out to say it's inhuman, it's dastardly, it's a massacre. You also hear France speak on its own side. You see the EU leaning on its own side, the United Arab leaning, and of course Russia is taking sides. So how do we begin to look at this? Because you've spoken about promoting coexistence, but then it looks as if the progressive countries, you know, are doing it differently by leaning on side supports on the countries differently.
No, those countries you will call progressive on these issues, they are not progressive. That's actually my argument. They are not progressive on this question. Now, the peaceful coexistence, as a first start, like I said, would be Israel committed to returning to the pre-1967 borders, which partitioned, in other words, respecting the UN Resolution 181 and never going beyond it. That's the first step. Now, there are those who also believe that actually a two-state solution will never work because, one, you can't found a proper thriving state on the path that have been given to the Palestinians. So for a start, yes, there are those who propose one-state solution, a one-state solution on a confederal basis. That is more, you know, conducive to peaceful coexistence, a thriving Palestinian economy. Already, they are inseparable from each other, actually. The Arab Israelis, they are Arabs who are in Israel, who are actually still in Israel. So it's not as if they cannot live together, because, like, again, they are children of the same father. What needs to be ensured is that in living together, an arrangement that guarantees the peace and security in Palestine, both for the Israelis and for the Palestinians, is what will solve the problem. And they can also have a thriving economy, so that the Arab part, or what would be the Palestinian state, does not become the poor neighbor, you know, of Israel. It doesn't become something like the Dominican Republic and Haiti, you know, as happened in Domingo, when Santo Domingo was divided, you know. So this is the solution. I am more persuaded by the one-state solution, so that the people can live together as children of the same father in a confederal, you know, system, freedom of religion, freedom of thought, and security for both the Jewish people and the Palestinian people.
But you know that another facet of this geopolitical mosaic is the consistent support of Israel by the United Nations.
Yes, that's where the root problem is.
So how do we begin to dissect that? Because it's really important.
To break down the power of the Jewish lobby in America. It is too strong. It exerts an overweening and overwhelming influence on American foreign policy. Any American president that wants to actually solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is hampered by the Jewish lobby in America. Already you can see them heading together If you are, it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, you can't do anything unless the power of the Jewish lobby in America is broken. And the way to do it is to start an actual conversation by going to the history, like I said, go to the root cause. A lot of people who are speaking, they are speaking only for purely religious reasons. They say, oh, Israel is a Christian state, or at least is the Holy Land. But is the Holy Land both for Jews and for the Arabs? And in any case, Israel is not a dominant Christian country. It's a Jewish, it's a Judaic, their religion is Judaism. So when Nigerian Christians, on a knee-jerk reaction, just say they are supporting Israel because it's a Christian country. They don't even understand that it is not a Christian country. And then two, you can't be a child of God, really, and say that God promised the land belonging to some of his children to his other children. We have to examine some of this because the biblical literalism, believing in everything in the Bible as a literal truth that is unchangeable. Whereas if you subject some of the claims in the Bible to scrutiny, we find out that nobody lives today according to them. Nobody lives, for instance, according to the strictures in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and all of those strict commands. Nobody lives according to them. So that's why there's a New Testament. Do we need even a newer testament? But leaving all those things aside, we're talking about human beings who were created by God. So if they were created by God, they were placed on that land, they were there in 1948, you were not there occupying the land in 1948, and then you came and drove them away, drove them into exile, and have banished them to the tiniest portion on the land and put them in prison, where you superintend over them. They can't come in or go out without you. How is that anything just in the eyes of anybody in the world who believes in humanity, peace, and progress?
All right, let's look at how this solidarity on both sides of the coin, I mean, those countries supporting Hamas and those supporting Israel, you know, underscores widespread concern. Because you see countries like Turkey, Iran, Morocco, Bahrain, Yemen, Tunisia, you've seen, you know, little clusters of, you know, outbreaks in terms of supporting the solidarity of Palestinians. And then you also see the United States, you see France, you see Poland, you see the countries divided on their support line. What is the global implication for this? Because in other countries who are showing solidarity, they are also showing sentiments by also having their own cluster of arguments on why this conversation should go this way.
What it does is to further, like you have used the word, polarize the world. But I think what is even more insidious is that it then gives legitimacy to rogue states to become champions of the Palestinians whose land is under occupation. That is what it does. So we now have a Putin who invaded Ukraine without justification, except that Ukraine has no right as a sovereign nation to choose who his friends should be. So if you do that, we're going to take over your land. In fact, denies, the same way they say Hamas denies the right of Israel to existence, that's the same way Putin denies the right of Ukraine to an independent existence as a nation. So now you give legitimacy to Putin, who is now saying America is not interested in solving the problem of Israel and Palestine. Why? Because, principally, the West feels a guilt for Nazi Holocaust. They feel a guilt for the atrocities of Hitler, who killed over 6 million Jews, put them in the concentration camps, gassed them to death, was intent on wiping them out, what they call the final solution. So that guilt is what has led them to turn a blind eye to every atrocity that the Zionist movement, again, the same way people like say separate Hamas, they say it's a war against Hamas. It's not a war against Hamas, it's a war against the Palestinians because it's their land. The Hamas is a product of the injustice, the grave injustice, what they call the catastrophe, what they call the Nakba, you know, of 1948. Hamas is a product of it. So that's the same way that all who resist occupation, you know, in their land are freedom fighters. So the world now giving legitimacy to the likes of Putin is because they feel a guilt towards the Holocaust, Nazism, and therefore take the side of Israel by claiming that it's a democracy.
All right. Thank you so much, Doctor, because, you know, with 84 countries supporting Israel and others supporting Hamas, there's a lot of conversation on the global implication for that. And labeling Hamas a terrorist organization also has wide, far-reaching effects. But I think that's much we can take this morning. We want to say thank you to our guests for coming on the show. Dr. Ifewodo, it's great to always see you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you're new to this channel, consider subscribing so you won't miss out any of our latest videos.